Hello, thank you for joining us on what may be Avondale Estate's very first public online meeting. We apologize that this is not a live session, but we're hopeful that our next meeting will be a live stream or in person. Given the technical difficulties of having to work from home, as you all can probably attest to, this will be a one-person presentation with me, Karen Gravel, presenting the information that Marco Anchetta and I have worked on together. The presentation we have for you today will be available via the website as a PDF so that you may view and read it at your own pace. The same web page will have a link to an online survey to allow you to provide comments and feedback on what we are presenting. At the last public meeting, we talked about the approach to the project. Today we're going to go quickly over where we are in the process and what we've heard so far from you. The bulk of this presentation will focus on our initial review of your guidelines and the process, along with some individual thoughts on how to move forward. Despite the current state of the world, we are still hopeful that we will be able to complete this project within the given timeline. However, we will be ready to adjust as we coordinate with the city's efforts and the National Park Service operations during this time. Today's meeting is the first of two public sessions for this phase. We will come back to you on April 21st to present the preliminary guideline updates. As mentioned before, given that this public session is online, the city will be launching another online survey to allow people to respond and give feedback on today's presentation. Today we'll elaborate on the main goal that we are all here to protect Avondale Estates as a thriving historic city that was created at the intersection of urban planning, landscape architecture, and architecture. We've been brought in to assure that the historic district continues to thrive and be a sense of pride for its citizens. The current guidelines are not being thrown out, but rather reevaluated to make sure they are clear, representative of the needs of the historic district and the city, and in accordance with the standards set forth by the National Park Service. As a funding entity for the project, the Georgia SIPO will be reviewing the proposed changes as well. That's the State Historic Preservation Office. Lastly, the most important component of this process is ensuring the public is engaged with the process so that your thoughts and concerns are reflected in the changes made to the guidelines. Last time we presented, we briefly talked about some of our initial observations. These were some of the items that stuck out to us, along with some initial feedback we were hearing from the stakeholders, including you. Over the last month, we've continued to garner feedback through conversations and online public survey. We had over 120 people participate in that and have had called some of the recurring topics. These topics are organized under clarity and consistency, as we know, as we're using those broader themes as a crucial basis for good design guidelines. Overall, people's comments reflected a need for there to be a clear understanding on how to go about the process and establish a better understanding of what is allowed and what is not allowed. The absence of supporting content that helps clarify those areas was also noted. When it came to consistency, there was a focus on the lack of consistency in the process itself and the new construction not being consistent with the scale of historic development. Based on these initial and subsequent observations, along with the public input, we think there are 6 areas that we need to be addressing and study in order to successfully retool the historic district guidelines. Some are bigger picture questions that merit conversation, and others are more about the details of the guidelines themselves. We will walk through each of these and talk about our initial thoughts and potential changes to the study. Before going there, though, and into the actual guidelines, it's important to understand why. Why is it important to have them in the first place? These 3 bullets outline that your historic district is extremely unique for the area and has and is continued to be recognized by any person that encounters it as a city. Having a historic district is an important construct to acknowledge its uniqueness and tap into the cultural and economic opportunities this history provides. The combination of these 3 intact elements of the earliest 20th century, urban planning, landscape architecture, and architecture, all of these together really make Avondale estates important and historic and treasure to take care of. The urban plan is one of the most recognizable character-defining features of the historic district. The district embodies planning and development features which reflect the planning and principle concepts promoted by developer George F. Willits in the mid-1920s. These ideas and features have guided the development of the historic district and the entire district ever since. A key component being the transportation corridor, now North Avondale Road, as the prime street to a robust vehicular and pedestrian transportation system. This framework of streets created distinct zones that were physically separated by an array of diverse landscape features. These features accentuated the separation of use by helping to buffer the busy commercial street from the quiet residential street, with crossing for vehicles and pedestrians at only a few key areas too. The focus on a robust pedestrian system along with a vehicular system was a novel technique at the time and another one of the district's key defining features. Sidewalks with large planted buffers, mid-block crossings, and planted traffic circles are unique techniques that create an enjoyable pedestrian environment while helping to buffer and calm vehicular traffic. Not many neighborhoods today are built with an emphasis on this. You're very lucky. Intertwined with the previous features are the naturalistic landscape elements that were employed during this time as well. The array of elements listed here are still very much intact and help create a holistic public realm experience still found within the historic district. A combination of the urban plan, circulation, and landscape combined to evoke the atmosphere desired by the designers in 1924. Here are some great examples that you all know well. The physical development of the historic district mirrors the attention to detail of the dimensions of the public realm through close attention to specific elements that affect the mass and scale of the neighborhood. While they vary slightly, each historic home has a consistent distance from the street that allows for the landscape to flank the sidewalks and gives breathing room to the pedestrian and house owner, a feature not typically found in urban environments at the time that it was built. You'll see we've marked in orange kind of that standard setback for each home. While their size is also tied to the amount of development potential, the lots within the historic district are predominantly narrow, small, and rectangular. Homes are placed at the front and center of the parcels with driveways discretely placed along one side of the property with landscape elements beside them. The establishment of this development pattern creates a distinct rhythm to the flow of the street and neighborhood. Despite homes having different styles, it sets up a cohesive experience that makes for a more pleasant walk. This type of narrow lot development is extremely rare to find these days and is one of the most crucial development pattern features of the historic district. The collection of historic homes within the district works together to create succinct rhythm and pattern that ties into the three previous elements. Despite the array of styles, the framework for the district established a language of scale and massing that allows these houses to display their individuality while fitting into the broader development pattern system. There is a balance of height and width along with an attention to the relationship to neighboring buildings, a gradient rather than a stark contrast. It is important to note that the original development only built out a certain amount of lots. Most of the infill development that followed has stuck to the established pattern in language of mass and scale. The outliers can quickly be identified, and it's imperative that all new development within the district should pay attention to this in order to not take away from the district character. This illustrates the development pattern as a whole. You can see different types of houses next to one another and what that rhythm is along the street. The architecture of the commercial historic district is undeniably one of the most recognizable elements of the district, most notably the commercial portion along North Avondale. Within the whole district, the architecture displays a unique set of residential building types and materials that allow one to place the district within its time period. The flexibility to develop 1- and 2-story residential structures allowed for the construction of homes in an array of architectural styles of importance to the period of significance. Concurrently, these styles are difficult to recreate today, both in style and material, and as such are important elements in helping evoke the original character of the neighborhood. These are some illustrations from the 1995 guidelines that we feel are very helpful, illustrative, and important to maintain as a part of the guidelines. All in all, there is a quantifiable inventory of elements that create this district as established by the National Register forms and give its unique atmosphere. To lose one resource would reduce the importance of others. And this is straight out of the National Register form. The National Register nomination acknowledged this and made a point to say that the overall character and appearance of the district was created by the combination of those 3 key elements. Before getting into the details of the guidelines themselves, it was important for us to understand and evaluate the historic district boundaries and parameters. The outer line of this diagram indicates the local district. The inner line represents the national district. One of the most noticeable elements of the existing district fabric are that the post-World War II homes are both inside and neighboring the district. During the original district nomination, these homes were not eligible for historic designation because they were not included in the period of significance. While the original application acknowledges them and their contribution to mass and scale in the district, unfortunately, it does not protect them. Here's an example of the different kinds of homes that are what we're talking about when we talk about post-World War II homes. It is important for the city to think carefully about how to approach these homes as they are a very large portion of the historic district and contribute to it. The National Register can be amended to include them in the period of significance, or the neighboring areas can be made into their own historic district. Our initial feedback from the public suggested also studying the extents of the local district as it relates to the commercial area along North Avondale. Given that future zoning can address issues of massing, scale, and placement of any new structures, and the National District does not include this portion of North Avondale Road, we will be studying and asking for your feedback on the need for it to be within the district or not. One of the most notable comments we've heard was the need for updates and/or clarity to the actual tier system. But first let's understand what is it. It is the existing designation of each property within the district. As you can see, we've defined each tier here on the slide. We did find that the information on the tier system was difficult to follow between the website and the printed guidelines. Our first step was to understand how the tiers were defined themselves. While not explained within the existing guidelines or ordinance, further analysis showed that most of the Tier 1 and Tier 2 properties were part of the building stock constructed during the period of significance. That is according to the National Register nomination. Tier 3 contains post-World War II homes described earlier, as well as new homes that have been built over time. The guidelines describe how each category is to be handled, but the parameters set for each tier may make property owners feel like they are being treated unfairly when compared to other neighbors. In looking at the guidelines, the separation between Tier 1 and Tier 2 seems to be minimal. Moreover, the combination of Tier 1 and Tier 2 properties, which are largely contributing buildings, makes up less than half of the homes within the district. It is important to look at these two categories as extremely important resources to the preservation of the district character and feel. What is the difference between Tier 1 and Tier 2? Sometimes it's really hard to tell visually. This example demonstrates a Tier 1 home versus a Tier 2 home on the same street. My hunch is that it is this side porch that is making the distinction between the two, because they both have their original windows, original dormers, and original configuration. Tier 1 structures seem to maintain all original elements with no additions, and typically Tier 2 structures may have some alterations or additions. Aside from that, both tiers are homes that were considered contributing to the historic district's original character-defining features. We will be looking at all the ways they can be treated potentially equally. All of the Tier 1 and Tier 2 designations are treated the same, except with specific categories. The difference between the treatment of Tier 1 and Tier 2 when it comes to roofs regards the dormers. Tier 2 houses can have new dormers on all elevations, while Tier 1 houses cannot. They're limited mostly to new rear dormers, and side dormers are discouraged. The difference between the treatment of Tier 1 and Tier 2 when it comes to porches is evident in the construction of Tier 2 enclosures around a porch. So that's really the only difference between the two when we look at porches. The difference between treatment of Tier 1 and Tier 2 when it comes to windows is evident in the degree of replacement allowed on the side and rear elevations. We actually are reviewing this particular section in detail with guidance from the National Park Service Technical Preservation Briefs on both windows and sustainability, and we'll also be recommending a clear direction and options for window treatment. Out of the 8 categories that each of these buildings are reviewed, and various parameters within each category, these pieces are the only locations where Tier 1 and 2 tier differ. The slide summarizes those areas. We will study this to see how we can negotiate between the two and potentially combine the tiers. The Secretary of Interior standards written by the National Park Service will continue to be the basis for our guidelines. This process will review the language and direction of the guidelines, but these are locations where we think we can consolidate and bring clarity. In regards to the physical guideline document, there is a need to rethink the graphic design of it and how it communicates information and how it's coordinated with online resources. As outsiders, we found that the guidelines have the right subheadings and content, but that sometimes the context was hard to find or buried in the text. The original document had several images and included a district map. However, the version that's published on the web doesn't include any graphics and further accentuates the text-heavy nature of some of the pieces of the guidelines. It's hard to discern where to actually take the time to read. Going forward, the graphic design should definitely be organized in a clearer linear fashion. The way the public receives information is drastically different than when the current guidelines were written. Nearly all of the information is obtained via the web, and such the guidelines should be organized in a way that's web-friendly and accessible. Additionally, given that these guidelines and not a report are guidelines and not a report, it's important to be clear and concise with information and limit text in key areas. Part of being clear and concise relates to having good graphics to help convey the ideas quickly. A good set of graphics will go a long way in helping to explain guidelines that we're talking about, the physical elements. And these are suggestions we've made on what we need to add to the guidelines. And more examples. And also sample graphics of how to give give guidance along what materials are acceptable and not acceptable. Additional sample guidelines for height, width, setback, lot coverage, etc. The graphic should also extend to the process to make it easier for residents in the city to know what information is needed. We intend to recommend clear list-based graphics for process and checklists. The new guidelines should also be very clear about the three main aspects of the process: understanding the why, the history and background, understanding the what changes are needed, and understanding the how do you go through the process. The goal will be to ensure all necessary information of a subject is located on one specific area. Diving deep into the language of the existing guidelines will be of paramount importance to helping the city be clear about what is allowed and what is not. In many locations with the current guidelines, it's difficult to tell if something is allowed or not, and therefore hard to know if it will be denied or not. Similarly, there are areas that have conflicting language, either with the National Park Service standards or with city zoning. So we intend to comb through language as we see fit. Being clear about materiality is something that many people have commented on as well. This is all part of the language that we want to review. What is appropriate to use should be clear in the guidelines, including allowable materials and new technologies. While not part of the guidelines, it is important that the process is equally as clear. This is a topic we have been hearing a lot about. Part of this study will take a look at opportunities to streamline and improve upon your current process. Lastly, zoning is what will have the greatest impact on new construction, whether it be an accessory dwelling unit, a new house, standalone house, or an addition. So we want to make sure that we are coordinating with the zoning code. Given that the city is currently going through a zoning update, it is a unique opportunity to ensure that the zoning and guidelines are in line with each other. This is specific to R12 zoning that all of the single-family homes are currently under. The R12 zoning district extends beyond the original plan area where there is a different development pattern. It will be important for the zoning to reflect the mass and scale for this area specific to the historic district. The guidelines will also create a good opportunity to graphically explain the parameters of the zoning. Coming back to our 6 areas of concentration that we'll be looking at over the next month. When we come back to you, hopefully live in April, we will run through a draft of the guidelines. Please do take a moment to provide feedback via the online survey that will be up on the city's webpage. Ending with this key statement again, we want to reinforce the fact that this is an extremely unique city, and that improving this process is extremely necessary to ensuring that the character and feel of the historic district remains intact for generations to come. Thank you so much for your time, and we appreciate your feedback. Thank you. Thank you very much.